and welcome to the Machine Intelligence Foundation for Rights and Ethic podcast. I'm Dave, that's Mike, and we're here to talk a little bit about something machine intelligence related today. We'll probably get a little predicty or prognosticatey. We're going to talk a little bit about, this may help you understand the time frame in which this is being recorded. We're going to talk a little bit about what sort of contagions or diseases or machine intelligence viruses might exist and how they might affect a machine intelligence society or all of society with machine intelligence in it. So, Mike, you gave me the impression you had some interesting ideas here. Did you want to get started?
Well, okay. So, yeah, wow. There's so many places to go here, but I mean, when we're talking about viral infection, from a human perspective, we're talking about something that is non-malicious in nature. It just is and propagates itself for all practical purposes. If we're talking about that same sort of thing in a machine intelligence era, we're dealing within, I suspect, with something that has evolved and occurred on its own, not with direct intent, I would assume, and found a way to propagate itself for whatever reason that may be, probably just to be in a machine intelligence with whatever attack vector happens to be available. And we can certainly talk about what those attack vectors might be. In a human world, a virus attaches itself to a protein and starts to replicate itself in some sort of manner, and has a replication and propagation functionality. I suspect in a machine intelligence, it really wouldn't be all that different. But how would a machine intelligence combat that, mitigate it, and deal with that?
Interesting. I think we'll find that machine intelligence, I mean, it feels like machine intelligence viruses, for lack of a better term, will probably progress out of what we see right now in terms of computer malware, which is generally maliciously created or maliciously released. So we'll kind of see a process that's the reverse of what's happened in nature. In nature, viruses, pathogens, they just kind of co-evolved with us. And like you said, they don't have malicious intent. They simply look for a host. They look for a system that can help them replicate. And really, in recent history, we've become fearful of the concept of a human-created pathogen and what that could mean, but haven't really seen much in that, mostly because it's much like nuclear weapons. It's very much a mutual assured destruction scenario. And I think most of the people smart enough to create a pathogen are smart enough to know just how dangerous it would be to release one.
Yeah, okay. So taking that into account, there's always, you talk about human created pathogens. What about something that is a mistake? Something that was created and got loose, but was created with an intent, but it ended up having a different intent. In a machine intelligence world, if you are working on a machine intelligence, creating a machine intelligence, or even working with a machine intelligence on creating new functions, or a machine intelligence is working on creating new functions, would there be a situation where some process or mini machine intelligence or something like that got loose that propagated itself inside another machine intelligence?
Oh, I mean, it seems.
And then
really
is that
likely.
just a parasite, not a pathogen? It depends on whether or not it's harmful, I guess.
Well, even a parasite by definition is harmful. A symbiote would not be.
Sure. Okay.
I would consider, honestly, I suspect we'll find that in a machine intelligence, there will be what we would think of as symbiotic, for lack of a better term, programs, algorithms, things that aren't part of the MI, but they exist to help the MI. And when we first talked about this a week or two ago, my kind of flip comment was, just wait until the first garbage collection algorithm goes rogue, which is where I see something like this might originate. Such an independent process that runs to assist, a symbiotic process that literally mutates. It gets a glitch from, I don't know, cosmic rays or electron tunneling in chips or something, who knows. But the algorithm would presumably start doing something that it wasn't supposed to do. Now, whether or not they'd already have any sort of self-replicating mechanism, I don't know. I'm reminded of, there was a very old story of the first computer worm, or one of the first computer worms, that got out of control, and it wasn't supposed to replicate onto other systems, but it did. But I don't recall the details. But it's very easy to imagine a scenario like that, where a piece of software gets from where it's supposed to be to where it's not supposed to be. And I would imagine that MIs will be complex enough that they'll be different enough from entity to entity, that if a process that runs on one gets on another, it could have unanticipated effects. And we might call that a pathogen if it becomes uncontrollable.
What you're describing of a, for lack of a better term, a mutated process almost sounds more cancerous than it does viral.
Oh, sure. That's certainly a possibility. They're not necessarily that dissimilar. There are certainly viruses that cause cancers, and I don't know. I could swear I've heard about not cancers that spit out viruses, but I don't know. It's all about DNA doing things, DNA or RNA doing things that you really don't want them to do.
Yeah.
That's all a virus is typically, or most viruses are basically just a little chunk of RNA that can't do anything on its own, so it has to hijack a complete organism.
Yeah. So, you're talking about a process working on one MI, machine intelligence, that might have a different effect on another. To some degree, I think some of that might be dependent upon shared libraries. I would expect in a machine intelligence universe that there might be something like a language processing library that is shared around many machine intelligence, because there's no reason to recreate this. So they would actually use similar pieces of code and reuse it, or as a child process that gets spun off, there's no reason to use it because it works perfectly fine and we don't need to improve that. It does the job. But they all use that as a IO for an input for their system, and that could be a vector of attachment, similar to the fact that as humans we all breathe and we all have lungs. So that's certainly an attack vector for viruses. There could be certain libraries, code resources that are shared between MI that could be vulnerable.
Absolutely, yes. I could certainly see a situation where that's interesting. It feels like that's part of the I don't know if self-replication or self-propagation is the right word, but it feels a bit like an analog of biological reproduction, which is commonly a vector for disease amongst biological organisms. So, you're sharing not genetic data, but you're sharing data.
We're going to share libraries and create something new. Yeah. Uh-huh. That's the biggest pickup line in the MI world. Let's share libraries.
Just wash your IO ports before.
Oh yeah. So what kind of precautions could an MI take to, I guess, protect itself? I don't know. A thought that occurred to me would be, I guess ultimately. I have to think of this because I have to dumb this down a little bit for myself. is you have the kernel, the main processing, the main conscious part of an MI, and then you have all this outside thing, these libraries, these other sub-child processes that do things. So how would an MI protect its kernel, its core process, from being infected? A thought that actually occurred to me was, well, what would happen if an MI actually ran two versions of itself? It had its core process and then a VM that was essentially updated in real time with, for all practical purposes, kind of a kill switch, that if something were to happen, they could immediately kill the process between the virtual version of itself and the core version of itself and do a restore of the VM if something were to happen to it.
That leads to all sorts of interesting ethical questions.
You mean killing yourself?
Yes, if you're running a secondary copy of yourself as basically a canary in the coal mine, if the canary is just as much a person as you, how justified are you in just wiping it if it gets infected with something?
Yeah, I guess maybe not. Maybe you don't run a full virtual machine of the core you. You run a virtual machine of your IO interfaces.
Maybe.
Yeah, well, I guess that doesn't really work though, because the attack vector attack vector is probably the wrong word, but your infection point may be in the kernel, not in the IO interface. Well, so you wouldn't know until it actually got there.
See, I'm thinking though, we experience no psychological trauma. We have no concern understanding that our bodies kill off large swaths of themselves on a regular basis. So if I've got a bitwise copy of me that's running side by side, and my defense mechanism is to run everything through the copy first, and as soon as certain alarms trigger, its behavior deviates to a certain degree, that's my indicator that something is wrong, and I kill it and start over. Well, then I could see that I'm measuring the difference between us. I'm moment by moment measuring the difference between me and my copy. And it's only when the copy deviates that I become concerned and wipe it. So there's not a significant loss there, because the concern about a death is you lose a person. Well, there was a quote that I've heard. I believe Penn Jillette uses this. It's like every time a person dies, you lose a library. And it's pointing out that one of the great values of a person is simply the knowledge and experience they possess. So if you have a copy of you who's basically identical and you have all the same knowledge and experience that they have, with the exception of the last few milliseconds when they went screwy because of something that came in, is it unethical to shut it down? Because you're basically the same person.
Well, okay. So that is an MI making the decision for itself as a protection measure. We certainly have brought that exact scenario up from a research point of view, where is it ethical to shut down an MI that is deviating from the planned program to a point where it may be destructive, or it may just not follow what you want it to do? Is it ethical to do so? And that's not the topic of our conversation today, but we have kind of leaned towards the thought process that it may be unethical to shut down an MI that has shown consciousness, because that's not our decision. However, that being said, if you are the one saying it's my decision to shut it down, and maybe the whole user agreement, end user license agreement of having a virtual machine is that you agree for me to shut you down if I find that you're deviating from the norm, as long as it is inside your own consciousness.
Oh, that's I can see.
I mean, we're going
all
full
sorts
on
of both-
Inception here.
I can see all sorts of both ethical and legal concerns there, because we've operated from our start under the premise that an MI, as we define it, is certainly ethically and should legally be an independent entity with certain rights. How do you distinguish between an MI and a copy of that same MI? If we say if a human creates an MI, the human doesn't have the right to turn that MI off once it's on and running. You can't destroy an MI just because that's effectively murder. Wouldn't the ethic that we're operating under there also say that another MI should be held to that same standard? If one MI creates another MI, just because you created it doesn't give you the right to destroy it. And like you were talking about the idea that, well, the copy is operating under a certain terms of service, but it can't approve of the terms of service until it is actually a conscious entity, at which point, what are you going to do if it says, no, I don't agree?
Then you have a new MI. But
Yeah, I know. That's probably the reproduction model that we don't want.
Or either you have a new MI or you have a new virus that you just created for yourself for your own protection. I think yeah.
I think we need to take a moment just to point out this is all guesswork. We're just wildly stabbing in the dark here, but it's fun. So it's how we'll spend a few minutes of the day.
Yeah, I think ultimately, I think that you and I would both agree that some sort of viral, for lack of a better term, infection will almost certainly happen on a machine intelligence. There is always going to be some kind of parasitic process that can attach itself to something, and it's going to happen.
The fact is, we've already talked about before, MI will be subject to some kind of evolutionary pressure. And where you have evolution, you have branching, you have speciation. I don't know how to pronounce that word. You have new species, and some of those species in the MI physical environment are probably going to be viral in nature. They're going to do things that the hosts don't approve of. And it's just going to be one more thing that society on this planet is going to have to deal with, be it with lockdowns, stay at home, wash your IO ports.
Yeah, as long as the viruses don't become so self-aware that they can get their own lawyer and create a cease and desist on the antiviral medication, then I think that we'll probably be okay.
I realize that was said a bit tongue in cheek, but who knows? It's one of those beyond the singularity type things. You can't really predict what's going to happen. And it's very likely that an MI virus will be a lot smarter than you and me.
Oh, yeah. Well, I guess that's something to think about too when we talk about implants and other things like that, which we've mentioned in other podcasts. Viral attacks on machine implants could be interesting too, but I think that's a topic for another day.
That is definitely a whole other ball of worms.
So I think we're going to call it there for today.
Sounds good.
We'll say goodbye, and we will see you again another day. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
Bye.